In 2010, the Institute of Medicine published a landmark report on vitamin D. 14 scientists, 2 years of work, over 1,000 pages of evidence review. Their conclusion, 600 to 800 IU per day was enough for most adults. The supplement industry breathed a sigh of relief. The medical establishment moved on, and then a research group including Dr. Robert Heaney of Creighton University, GE. One of the most published calcium and vitamin D researchers in the world, GE, reran the statistical model behind that conclusion. What they found, GE, published in the journal Nutrients in 2015, GE, was a calculation error, a fundamental mistake in how the dose-response data had been analyzed. The corrected math suggested the adequate intake should have been closer to 7,000 IU per day, not 600. The IOM has not changed its recommendation. I'm Dr. Stack. This is BrainStack Labs, and today we're going into vitamin D GO, the most common nutrient deficiency on Earth, GOs, and the reason most people who are already taking it are still deficient anyway. Here's the scale of the problem. Roughly 1 billion people worldwide have insufficient vitamin D levels. That's not a niche health issue. That's a systemic failure of modern life meeting modern nutrition. The threshold for deficiency is itself disputed. The IOM says anything below 20 nanograms per milliliter of serum, 25 hydroxyvitamin D. The Endocrine Society says below 30. A growing body of researchers argues the optimal range is 40 to 60 nanograms per milliliter. Depending on which cutoff you use, deficiency rates in the U.S. alone range from 29% to over 70% of adults. You almost certainly know someone who's been told their levels are low. You may be that person. Here's what makes this genuinely strange. Vitamin D isn't exotic. Your body makes it. Vitamin D receptors exist in virtually every tissue type. GO, your bones, your immune cells, your brain, your cardiovascular system, your gut lining. This isn't a trace mineral that does one job. It behaves more like a hormone precursor, GO. Something the body needs system-wide, not just for one pathway. So why is deficiency epidemic? And why are the people taking supplements still ending up with low levels 6 months later? That's what this is actually about. 3 things. Most people taking vitamin D are getting wrong GORs, and what the research says to do instead. Walk into any pharmacy and look at the vitamin D section. You'll see 2 versions, D2 and D3. They're sold side by side, often at the same price point. The label difference is small. The biological difference is significant. A 2012 meta-analysis published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, GO, Tripkovich and colleagues, pooling data from multiple controlled trials, GOS, found that D3 raises serum 25 hydroxyvitamin D levels approximately 87% more effectively than D2 at equivalent doses, 87%. At the same milligram count, D3 is doing substantially more work in your body than D2. D2, GORO, ergocalciferol, GA, is plant-derived and cheaper to manufacture. It's also the form historically prescribed for clinical deficiency, which is how it became the default in medical practice for decades. D3, cholecalciferol. GO is the form your skin synthesizes when exposed to UVB radiation from sunlight. It's what the human body evolved to produce and use over hundreds of thousands of years. So, here's the question that doesn't get asked enough. If researchers have known this since at least 2012, why are D2 supplements still on pharmacy shelves? Why do clinical prescriptions still default to the less effective form? Part of the answer is inertia. GA. Clinical guidelines update slowly, and D2 became embedded in practice before this comparison data existed. Part of it is cost, and part of it is that supplement labeling is mostly unregulated, which means a company can sell you ergocalciferol, call it vitamin D, and be technically correct. Check your bottle. If it says D2 or ergocalciferol, that's the first thing to address. The second error is the number on the label. 600 IU. That's the recommended dietary allowance for adults under 70. The amount the IOM concluded in 2010 was sufficient to meet the needs of 97.5% of the healthy population. Here's the context that rarely gets stated alongside that number. The RDA for vitamin D was designed around one specific endpoint: GI, preventing rickets, the severe bone deformity caused by profound, prolonged deficiency, not optimizing immune response, not supporting the cardiovascular system, not maintaining the neurological processes linked to mood regulation, the minimum to avoid the most severe deficiency disease. That's what 600 IU was calibrated for. The Endocrine Society's Clinical Practice Guideline G, authored by Dr. Michael Holick of Boston University Medical School, the researcher who identified the biologically active form of vitamin D in the early 1970s, GEO, recommends 1,500 to 2,000 IU per day for adults to maintain healthy serum levels. To treat documented deficiency, the same guideline suggests 3,000 to 4,000 IU daily for several months. Take a look at your bottle right now. If the dose is 600 IU, you're taking the rickets prevention amount, which is not nothing GU, but it's probably not what you thought you were taking it for. What the VITAL trial found at 2,000 IU per day is instructive. This was a 2019 randomized controlled trial of 25,000 participants, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, GU, one of the largest vitamin D trials ever conducted. At 2,000 IU, they found a statistically significant reduction in cancer mortality over follow-up. They did not find a reduction in cardiovascular events, which tells you two things: dose matters, and the specific health outcome you're trying to influence matters. Taking vitamin D is not a single decision. Here's the piece that most vitamin D conversations skip entirely: GUAN. And it may be the most important one. Picture what vitamin D does in the calcium pathway. One of its primary functions is enhancing intestinal absorption of calcium. You eat food containing calcium, and vitamin D helps your gut pull more of it into the bloodstream. This is well established, and it's part of why vitamin D matters for bone density. But calcium circulating in the bloodstream needs direction. The intended destination is bone tissue. The problem, GUI, particularly when calcium absorption is elevated, GU, is that calcium also deposits in soft tissue, including arterial walls. This is arterial calcification, and it's a well-documented contributor to cardiovascular risk. Vitamin K2, GORs, specifically the MK7 form GOR, activates a protein called matrix Glay protein. That protein inhibits calcium deposition in arterial walls and directs it toward bone instead. Think of K2 as the traffic director that tells calcium where to go once vitamin D has moved it into circulation. The Rotterdam study, published in 2004 by Gillines and colleagues, followed over 4,800 adults and found that higher K2 intake GUs, not K1, the form abundant in leafy greens GIs, was associated with reduced arterial calcification and significantly lower cardiovascular mortality over a 10-year follow-up. The assumption most people make: taking D3 is the complete answer. What the research increasingly points toward, D3 and K2 together, addresses the full pathway. They work on the same calcium system. Supplementing D3 while ignoring K2 may be increasing calcium throughput without providing the routing mechanism. Most supplements separate them. The evidence suggests they probably shouldn't be. Here's the part of this that should make you pause. Go back to the cold open. The IOM published 600 IU as the adequate intake in 2010, based on a statistical model that a subsequent analysis suggested had a calculation error, G8 one that would, if corrected, have pointed to something closer to $7,000 IU. The IOM has not revised the figure. Meanwhile, your body under the right conditions, GUs, 20 to 30 minutes of midday summer sun, significant skin surface area exposed, lighter skin, appropriate latitude GI can synthesize 10,000 to 20,000 IU of vitamin D in a single session. That number is worth sitting with. It's what your biology is calibrated to produce. Not 600, not 2,000. Your skin, under ideal evolutionary conditions, was running the equivalent of 10,000 IU on a sunny afternoon. We are not in those conditions anymore. People with higher melanin concentration, GBUOs, Darker-skinned geos require 3 to 5 times longer UV exposure to produce the same vitamin D output as lighter-skinned individuals at the same latitude. Melanin is a natural sunscreen. It evolved as protection against UV radiation near the equator, where sun intensity is high year-round. It was never calibrated for life at 40 or 50 degrees north latitude, where UVB is weak or absent for 6 months of the year. Deficiency rates in Black Americans exceed 70% by the Endocrine Society threshold, not because of diet choices, not because of supplement use, because of a biological system that evolved in one geography being deployed in another GA, and because modern life means spending 90% of waking hours indoors, regardless of skin tone. And then there's sunscreen. SPF 30 blocks approximately 97.5% of UVB radiation GL. The wavelength that triggers vitamin D synthesis in skin. The single most common piece of sun safety advice from dermatology actively suppresses your body's primary vitamin D production mechanism. 2 medical specialties, each optimizing for their specific outcome, without looking at the full system. Not a conspiracy, just the consequence of fragmented medicine operating in silos. The practical summary. Form, D3, not D2. Look for cholecalciferol on the label, not ergocalciferol. If you have a prescription for D2, it's worth asking your doctor whether D3 is appropriate for your situation. Dose. 600 IU is the rickets prevention floor. For adults not getting regular sun exposure, 1,500 to 2,000 IU per day is more in line with Endocrine Society guidance for maintenance. If you're documented as deficient, 3,000 to 4,000 IU for several months is the clinical treatment range. Get tested first GIs. A 25-hydroxyvitamin D blood test is inexpensive and tells you exactly where you are. Cofactor. K2 in the MK7 form. It works in the same calcium pathway as D3. The evidence for taking them together is stronger than the evidence for D3 alone at higher doses. The studies I referenced are all linked in the description. The 2012 Tripkovich meta-analysis, the Holic Endocrine Society, Clinical Practice Guideline, the Rotterdam Study, the 2019 Vital Trial, and the 2015 Heaney paper on the IOM statistical error. They're worth reading directly. If this gave you something useful, subscribe GWOW. We do one of these every week, and we don't do hype or marketing language, just the research. Tell me in the comments, what dose of vitamin D are you currently taking? I want to see where people actually land. I'm Dr. Stack. See you in the next one.